I was asleep when the doorbell rang. At my age, 3 in the morning is usually reserved for bathroom trips and worrying about things I can't change, not visitors. The sound cut through the house like someone had thrown a stone into still water, sharp, wrong, echoing. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamt it. The house was dark and quiet, the way it always is at that hour. The old clock in the hallway ticked steadily, unconcerned. My bedroom felt heavy with the warmth of sleep I'd just been pulled from. I lay there, heart thudding too loudly in my chest, and listened. Then it rang again. This time there was no mistaking it. "What on earth?" I muttered, pushing the covers aside. My knees complained, as they always do, a dull ache that flared when I swung my legs over the side of the bed. I sat there for a second to let the dizzy edge pass, the little drop in my stomach that has become familiar these last few years. The bell rang a third time. All right," I said, more to myself than to whoever was at the door. I slipped my feet into the pair of slippers I keep by the bed, grabbed the robe from the hook, and shrugged it on over my nightgown. Old habits made me reach for my glasses on the nightstand. Without them, the world blurs into soft lines and smears of color. The air in the hallway was cool against my face. I could smell the faint mixture of laundry detergent and old wood that is simply home to me now. As I moved toward the front of the house, I flicked on the small lamp by the family photos. Its yellow light spilled over frames that had held the same captured faces for years. Robert, smiling despite his terrible tie, stood in one. He's been gone 10 years now, heart attack on an ordinary Tuesday, and yet he still manages to take up half the wall. My son, Mark, in another, with his arms slung around a dog we no longer have. He lives 2 towns over these days, with a family of his own, and calls me every Sunday after dinner. And my daughter, Hannah, at 14 in another, chin jutted out, mouth set in a way that told me even then that the years ahead would not be simple. The doorbell didn't ring again, but I could hear something else now. A sound I couldn't place at first, soft, irregular, almost like hiccups, or tiny cries being swallowed before they could fully form. I felt my stomach tighten. I reached the front door and paused. At 3 in the morning, you don't just fling the door open. Not even in a quiet neighborhood like mine. Not even when you've lived somewhere for 30 years and know the names of most of the dogs on the block. "Who is it?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. For a second, there was only breathing on the other side. Then a voice said my name in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Mom." The word punched the air right out of my lungs. It wasn't just what she said. It was the way she said it. Rough around the edges, frayed with exhaustion and something like panic, but still carrying the shape of a child calling for her mother in the dark. I didn't realize my hand was shaking until I tried to unlatch the chain. I opened the door. The porch light, which I keep on a motion sensor because I forget more things now than I used to, clicked on with a soft hum. It flooded the front step in pale yellow. There on the concrete stood my daughter. I knew her in an instant and didn't recognize her at all. Hannah is 38 now. In my mind, she's frozen somewhere between 17 and 22, eyeliner too thick, shoulders too square, mouth always ready with a retort. The woman on my doorstep had her bones, her eyes, but the rest, life had filled in the gaps I'd missed. Her hair was longer than I remembered, pulled back in a messy knot that had clearly been tidy at some point earlier in the day. Strands had escaped and clung damply to her temples. She wore an oversized sweatshirt that had seen better years, leggings with a tear at the knee, and sneakers spattered with something I hoped was mud. Her face was thinner than it should have been, cheekbones more pronounced, dark circles smudged under her eyes like bruises. And in her arms, cradled close to her chest, was a baby. For a moment, all I could do was stare. The baby was wrapped in a faded blanket, one tiny fist visible, knuckles impossibly small. A soft cap covered his head, but wisps of dark hair peeked out around the edges, damp against the cotton. His face was scrunched, eyes closed, mouth open in a silent cry that broke into an audible whimper when the cold air touched his cheeks. Hannah shifted her hold automatically, bouncing just slightly, the way mothers do without thinking. The movement was so practiced, so instinctive, that it felt jarringly out of sync with the picture of my daughter I'd been clinging to all these years. What are you doing here?" I heard myself say. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded small in the night air. She blinked at me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the girl who used to storm down this very walkway, slamming the door behind her because I dared to say no to something. Her lip trembled. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. The baby let out a louder cry then, as if punctuating her sentence, a thin wail that cut right beneath my ribs. I stepped aside without thinking. "Come in," I said. "It's freezing out there, you'll catch your death." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, eyes darting past me into the dim interior of the house she hadn't been in for almost 7 years. Then she crossed the threshold. The smell of night air and stale smoke and something like baby powder came with her. I closed the door gently behind them, the click of the lock sounding much too loud in the silence. Up close, the baby's cries sharpened into a staccato rhythm, not full-throated yet, but heading that way. His tiny chest rose and fell fast under the thin blanket, the sound oddly loud in my quiet hallway. "How old?" I asked, my eyes drawn inexorably to the small face. 8 weeks, she said. 9 on Tuesday. 8 weeks. 2 months of a life I hadn't even known existed. What's their name?" I asked, tripping over the pronoun unsure. Her lips twitched toward a smile and then faltered. She said. "His name is Oliver." "Oliver." The name settled in the room like a new piece of furniture you're not quite used to, but know will soon feel like it's always been there. "Here," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "Sit down. I'll turn on a light." I fumbled for the lamp by the sofa, heart still rattling around in my chest like something that had been knocked off a shelf. The warm glow spilled over the room, picking out the worn arms of the sofa, the afghan folded over the back, the ring mark on the coffee table from a glass Robert once forgot a coaster under. It all suddenly felt like a stage set for the wrong play. Hannah sank onto the edge of the couch, clutching Oliver as if he might vanish if she loosened her grip. His cries rose in pitch, tiny face darkening, mouth a perfect O of protest. "When did you last feed him?" I asked. She swallowed. "About an hour ago, at a gas station off the highway. He's just fussy." She sounded defensive, the way new mothers often do when anyone asks a question that could be interpreted as criticism. I nodded. Babies are allowed to be fussy at 3 in the morning. It's practically in their contract. One corner of her mouth lifted, quickly and uncertainly, and then her expression crumpled again. I sat down in the armchair opposite them, the one that has molded itself to my shape over years of evening television and quiet reading. The springs creaked in their familiar way. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed to life and then stuttered quiet again. Up close, I could see how badly her hands were shaking. "What happened?" I asked softly. That was when she started to cry. Not the pretty, single tear down the cheek kind of crying you see in movies. This was thick, messy crying. The kind where your breath stutters and your shoulders shake and your words trip over your sobs. "I messed up," she choked out. "I messed up so bad, Mom." The word hit me again. Mom. Once upon a time, I heard that word 10 times a day. In annoyance, in need, in affection. Over the last 7 years, I'd heard it only in my head, echoes of a time before the silence. I took a breath. "Start from the beginning," I said. "We've got time." I didn't add that I didn't know if that was true. At our age, time feels both endless and fragile, like a spider web in winter. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt, trying not to jostle Oliver too much. He quieted a little, more from exhaustion than comfort, his cries subsiding into hiccuping whimpers. His little fingers had worked their way free of the blanket, one clamped around a loose thread and refused to let go. "I met someone," she said finally. Of course she had. There is almost always a someone, somewhere in the story of estrangement. He is, I don't even know what tense to use. She let out a humorless laugh that broke on the last syllable. "His name is Colin." The name dropped between us, with a small, unpleasant weight. "I didn't tell you," she continued, anticipating the question I hadn't yet asked, "because I knew what you'd say." "Oh," I said mildly, "and what would I have said?" "That he was wrong for me," she said. "That he was too old, that he moved too fast, that love doesn't look like drama." I raised an eyebrow. Was I wrong? She deflated a little, shoulders slumping as if someone had let the air out of her. "No," she whispered, "you weren't wrong." Oliver let out a small, hiccuping sound again, and she shifted him against her shoulder, patting his back with a hand that had steadied itself through necessity. His face brushed the worn fabric of her sweatshirt, and he made a soft, offended grunt, as if even in sleep he had opinions. "We met at the restaurant," she said. "I was serving, he was a regular. Always there late, always in the same booth. He tipped well, he listened, he made me feel like I wasn't a failure." The word sat heavy between us. "You're not a failure," I said automatically. She flinched. "You didn't sound so sure of that the last time we spoke." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. The protest stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. The last time we spoke, truly spoke, had been almost 7 years ago. In this very room, voices raised, anger sharp enough to cut our shared history to ribbons. She had packed a bag, slammed the door, and hurled the words over her shoulder like a grenade. "I'm done with you, Mom. I don't need you anymore." I had stood in the silence that followed, heart pounding, and said nothing. Pride can be very quiet and very stupid. "We can come back to that," I said gently. "Tell me about now." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Things were good at first," she said. "He was attentive, generous. He'd pick me up after my shifts, bring me food when I couldn't afford it. He said all the things I wanted someone to say. I didn't say what we were both thinking. That prey always sounds tasty to the hunter at first. Then I got pregnant," she said, looking down at Oliver. I didn't plan it. We weren't careful. It just happened. She let out a shaky breath. I was terrified, she said. I thought about calling you. Every day for weeks I thought about it. I'd even dial your number and then hang up before it rang. I felt my throat tighten. Why didn't you call? I asked quietly. Because I didn't want to hear "I told you so," she said. I didn't want to hear how I'd ruined my life. Again, I didn't want to see that look on your face. I closed my eyes briefly. The look she was talking about, the tight mouth, the pinched brows, the exhausted disappointment, I knew it well. I'd seen it in the mirror enough times. Then what? I asked. Then he changed, she said simply. She didn't elaborate immediately, but she didn't have to. I've lived long enough to know what changed can cover. Temper, drinking, hands that used to hold now hitting or gripping too hard, words that used to flatter now cutting. He started staying out, she said, then blaming me when I asked where he'd been, said I was clingy, said I was lucky anyone wanted me. Oliver squirmed, and she absently adjusted him, the way you do when you've been doing it day and night. When I told him I was pregnant, he was weirdly calm, she said. Said we'd make it work. Said kids didn't cost that much if you didn't spoil them. Which, looking back, should have been a sign he'd never met a child in his life. Despite myself, I huffed out a small laugh. A ghost of a smile touched her face, and then faded. He promised he'd be there, she said. At the appointments at the birth, said he'd be a better father than his own. He has a father, I asked. Somewhere, she replied. He said the man left when he was 6. I should have listened harder to that part. Silence settled for a moment, punctuated only by Oliver's soft breathing and the faint tick of the hallway clock. He wasn't there, was he? I said softly. No, she whispered. He was at the bar or with someone else, or nowhere I could find. She swallowed. When Oliver was born, I texted him a picture, she said. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. My hands gripped the arms of my chair. The old upholstery scratched my palms, a small, grounding discomfort. And last night, I asked. She let out a shaky sigh. Last night, she said, he told me he's leaving town. Said this place is a dead end. Said he's got an opportunity in another state. Said I could come if I didn't drag him down. Her voice cracked. With the baby, I asked. He said he's not the father type, she said bitterly. Said he didn't want to be saddled. She looked down at Oliver, who had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, his tiny mouth slack against her shoulder. I asked what that meant, she continued. If he meant Oliver, he just shrugged, said he never asked for this. She was quiet for a moment, fingers stroking the back of the baby's blanket in a small, frantic motion. I packed what I could fit in the car, she said. Diapers, a few outfits, formula, his car seat. He was passed out on the couch. I left the key on the table. Her eyes flicked automatically toward the front window, where the curtains were drawn tight. Do you think he'll come looking for you? I asked. She shook her head, but the gesture was too quick to be entirely convincing. He doesn't like effort, she said. Driving all the way out here, taking responsibility, that's work. But I still kept checking the mirror the whole drive, just in case. I nodded slowly. The back of my neck prickled. Without making a show of it, I glanced toward the locks on the front door, making sure they were still set. They were. So I had a choice, she said. Stay in that apartment I can barely afford with no help, no family, no one. Or come here. Her eyes met mine then, red-rimmed and desperate. To the person I swore I didn't need, she finished. I looked at my daughter, my stubborn, hurting, foolish, brave daughter, and the baby whose existence had been kept from me for 2 months, and yet already felt tied to me in ways I didn't understand. Old anger stirred in my chest, along with something else I wasn't ready to name yet. I see, I said. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Behind us, the clock in the hallway chimed softly. 3:15, half past, time moving whether we were ready or not. Well, I said, pushing myself up from the chair. My knees popped in protest. First things first, you both need sleep. There's a guest room that hasn't forgotten you yet. We can fight with the past in the morning. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Are you sure, she whispered, you want us here? Something in me snapped at that, an old, brittle twig giving way. Of course I want you here, I said, a little too sharply. What did you think I was going to do, send you back out to the highway with a newborn? Her eyes widened, hurt flaring before she could hide it. I felt the heat rise to my face. I pressed my lips together, took a breath, and forced myself to step back from that flash of anger. I'm sorry, I added softer. That was unkind. I'm tired, you're tired. I shouldn't have snapped. She swallowed and gave a small nod. I didn't know if I had the right to ask, she said. I looked at her, at the baby, at the years between us like a stretch of road we'd both refused to walk. I'm not sure about much these days, I said honestly, but I'm sure you're not going back there tonight. Her shoulders sagged in relief, so sudden it was almost painful to watch. Okay, she said, okay. As I led them down the hallway toward the room that used to be hers, posters long gone, walls repainted a soft cream, but still somehow Hannah's space in the bones. I felt the old house shift around us. The floorboards creaked in familiar protest under our weight. The faint smell of lavender from the sachet I keep in the linen closet mixed with the powdery scent clinging to Oliver's blanket. I turned back the covers on the narrow bed and fluffed the pillow, an absurd gesture in the face of everything that had just crashed back into my life. I don't have a crib, I said. We'll have to improvise for tonight. The laundry basket with some blankets, maybe. We'll get something proper tomorrow. Her mouth curved, weary but real. I used to sleep in a drawer at Grandma's, she said. This will be luxury. You didn't sleep in it, I corrected automatically. You napped in it, there's a difference. She eased down onto the bed, shifting Oliver so he could lie across her chest. His tiny hand flexed and then settled against the fabric of her sweatshirt, fingers splayed like he was trying to hold her there. The sight of it stung behind my eyes. Get some sleep, I said. I'm just down the hall if you need anything. Mom, she said as I reached the doorway. Yes. Thank you, she whispered. I nodded. My throat was too tight to trust with words. It was the middle of the night, and everything was the same. It was the middle of the night, and everything had changed. Morning made everything look more ordinary. That's the cruel and kind thing about daylight. It doesn't care what happened at 3 a.m. The sun comes up, the birds start their ridiculous chirping, and the world moves as if hearts weren't cracked open on living room couches a few hours earlier. I woke up later than usual. My body protested as I sat up, a dull ache in my back and hips. For a second, I wondered if it had all been a dream. A very vivid, very specific dream. Then I heard it. Not crying, not wailing. Just the soft, grunty little noises babies make when they're half asleep and half deciding if they want to complain about it. A sort of questioning, sound, followed by a sigh almost too big for such a small body. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and listened. There it was again, a tiny, questioning sound, followed by the faint creak of the old floorboard in the hallway outside the guest room. Someone moving very slowly, trying not to wake anyone. My heart did that little stutter it used to do when my kids were teenagers sneaking in late. Except this time the sneaking wasn't defiance, it was exhaustion. I pulled on my robe and opened my door. The house felt different, not in any visible way. The same pictures on the walls, the same runner on the floor, the same scratch on the baseboard where we'd once moved a too heavy bookshelf without lifting it properly. But there was a softness in the air that hadn't been there the day before. A new breathing. A faint, unfamiliar smell of milk and baby shampoo mingling with the usual coffee and dust. The door to the guest room was ajar. I knocked lightly and then peeked in. Hannah was sitting on the edge of the bed, hair a wild halo around her face, one leg folded under her, the other foot braced on the floor. She wore the same sweatshirt as last night, now creased from sleep. Oliver lay across her lap in just a onesie, his little belly round and exposed, his limbs flailing in slow motion as he worked up the energy to cry properly. She jumped slightly when she saw me, guilt flashing across her face like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "Sorry," she whispered. "I tried to be quiet." "You're fine," I said. "If a house can't handle baby noises, it's not a house worth living in." She let out a nervous huff of air that might have been a laugh. "I couldn't find the diapers," she said. "I didn't pack enough. I thought I had more in the bag, and then last night her voice wobbled. "We went through 3 in 2 hours." "That's what babies do," I said. "Consume resources and redefine the word leak." The corner of her lip quirked, but her eyes were glossy, dangerously close to spilling over. "Let's get him changed," I said, "and then we'll make a list." "A list," she repeated, as if I'd suggested building a spaceship. "Of what we need," I replied. "Diapers, wipes, formula if you're using it, coffee if I'm going to survive this." "Coffee," she said, eyes closing briefly in appreciation. "Yes, God, yes." Between the two of us, we managed to change Oliver using the last diaper from her bag, and a towel folded strategically on the bed, in case he decided to test gravity. He kicked his legs in outraged protest at the indignity of being wiped down, his skin impossibly soft and warm under my fingertips. "Pass me the wipes," she said. I handed them over and watched her work, efficient despite her trembling hands. The smell of the wipes, artificial cucumber, and something chemical cut through the mustiness of the guest room. It struck me then how many milestones of her life I'd missed. Not just this baby, the pregnancies she might have lost, the jobs she took and left, the friends I'd never met, the apartments she'd moved through like stations on a train I wasn't allowed to board. "Mom," she said suddenly without looking up, "you're staring." "I'm allowed," I said. "I'm trying to memorize him before he doubles in size, which, based on my experience, should be in about 5 minutes. This time her smile was clearer, if still fragile. "I didn't think you'd be like this," she admitted. "Like what?" I asked. "Soft," she said. "I thought you'd be, I don't know, mad, cold, punishing." I thought about that, as she snapped the fresh diaper into place and closed the tiny tabs with shaking fingers. "I am mad," I said, "and I am hurt, but I'm not stupid enough to start a fight with someone who hasn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in 8 weeks. She let out a laugh that turned into a sniff, wiping her nose on the back of her hand. We moved to the kitchen after that. The morning light slanted in through the small window over the sink, turning the dust in the air into floating flecks of gold. Outside, the maple tree scratched lazily at the glass with one thin branch. The house still smelled faintly of last night's chamomile tea, and now the sweet, sour odor that only bottles and burp cloths can bring. I set water to boil and pulled down the jar of coffee grounds, grateful I'd refilled it last week. The grind smelled dark and familiar, comforting in its bitterness. Hannah sank into one of the chairs at the table, Oliver tucked into the crook of her arm. His eyes were open now, dark and unfocused, taking in the world in vague, drifting glimpses. Every now and then his gaze seemed to land on something, on the flicker of light on the wall, on the steam rising from a mug, on my face, and linger for a second longer, as if he were filing it away in whatever passes for memory in such a new brain. "He looks like you," I said, pouring water into the filter. She frowned. "Everyone says that, I don't see it." "You will," I replied. "One day he'll make a face and you'll think, oh no, there I am." She watched me move around the kitchen, eyes tracking the small, practiced motions of my morning routine. Mug, spoon, sugar jar, the dented kettle back on its burner. "You kept everything," she said suddenly, nodding toward the fridge. It took me a moment to understand what she meant. Magnets held up old photos, some of her and Mark as children, some of Robert holding them at the beach, some of drawings and postcards. One was a crayon sun with what might have been a dog underneath, signed in shaky letters. Hannah, age 5. "I didn't know what to throw away," I said, "so I threw away nothing." She looked at the drawing for a long time, her jaw tight. The kettle whistled. I poured coffee into 2 mugs, added sugar to hers the way she used to take it. I hesitated, then slid it in front of her. "You remember," she said softly. "I remember a lot of things," I said. We drank in silence for a few minutes. Oliver made small noises, the kind that sound like complaints about the unfairness of existence. Hannah rocked him gently, the legs of the chair squeaking faintly on the worn linoleum. "We should talk," I said eventually. She winced, "I know." "Not all at once," I said. "I'm not interested in cramming 7 years of hurt into one morning, but some of it." She nodded, staring into her mug, as if the coffee grounds might arrange themselves into a map for her. "Do you remember the last time you were here?" I asked. Her jaw clenched. "Yes," she said, "I remember every word." So did I. She'd been 31, wired with a kind of restless energy that always made me feel like furniture in whatever room she was in. She'd been dating a different man then, Kevin, Kyle. Something with a K loud, opinionated, always with a scheme on the horizon. "He's good to me," she'd said that day. "He believes in me." "He believes in what you can do for him," I'd replied. "There's a difference." Words had escalated. Accusations long stored up had found their way to the surface. I'd said she was wasting her potential. She said I'd never seen her as anything but a project. "You're always grading me," she'd shouted, "like I'm a paper you get to mark up. And you're always crumpling yourself up and handing yourself to the first man who asks." I'd snapped back, immediately regretting it and unable to take it back. She'd gone very still then, the way dangerous weather can sometimes make the air go quiet. "You know what?" she'd said. "I'm done. I don't need you, Mom." She grabbed a duffel bag from her old room, shoved clothes into it, and thrown the strap over her shoulder. The front door had slammed so hard the frame rattled. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Pride calcified into habit. I told myself she'd call when she was ready. I told myself I wouldn't chase her, that I needed to protect myself from the whiplash of her coming and going. And then, somehow, 7 years had gone by. "You never came after me," she said now, voice small. Something in me flared hot. "I chased you for 25 years, I said, sharper than I intended. Through every bad idea and every half-finished plan. When you told me you didn't need me, I believed you. What was I supposed to do, bang on your door and force you to be my daughter?" My voice had risen. I heard it echo back off the tile and cupboards, too loud for this narrow kitchen. Hannah shrank slightly in her chair, her shoulders curling in. I pressed my lips together, turned away, and busied myself at the sink. I turned on the tap and let the cold water run over my hands until the sting in my chest eased. "I'm sorry," I said after a moment, my back still to her. That was more heat than necessary. I turned off the water and dried my hands on a dish towel that had seen better days. She stared down at Oliver, who was now busy trying to shove his whole fist into his mouth. I wanted you to prove me wrong," she said. "To show up at my door, to say you were sorry." "Sorry for what?" I asked quietly, returning to my chair. For not letting me live my life," she said, the words faltering as she spoke them, like she wasn't sure they still fit. "To watch you hurt yourself," I said. "To stand by while you chose men who made you smaller and jobs that paid you in compliments instead of security. That's what I was supposed to apologize for." Tears filled her eyes again. "When you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous," she said. "It sounded ridiculous at the time, too," I said. "That didn't stop you." She laughed wetly, wiping at her face with the cuff of her sleeve. Oliver squirmed, fussing. She adjusted her grip, lifting him to her shoulder and patting his back. He let out a small, surprisingly forceful burp, blinked in startlement, and then fixed his dark eyes on me for a long, serious moment, as if he were weighing us both and finding us lacking but acceptable. "I could have done more," I said, surprising myself. Her head snapped up. "I could have called," I continued. "I could have sent letters. I told myself I was respecting your boundaries, but part of it was fear. Fear that you'd reject me again. I let my pride hide under the word dignity. They're not the same thing." She swallowed. "I thought you didn't care," she whispered. "I cared so much I couldn't breathe," I said, my voice cracking. "That's why I did nothing." I hesitated, then added the part that had sat heavy on my conscience for years. "Do you remember your 35th birthday?" I asked. She frowned, sort of. I was working doubles back then. "Why?" "I sat at this table," I said, tapping the worn wood with my fingertips, with the phone in front of me. I watched the clock. I told myself I was going to call. I rehearsed what I would say. "Happy birthday, Hannah. I love you. I'm here." And then I didn't. "Why?" she asked, the word barely audible. "Because I was angry," I said. "I told myself I was teaching you a lesson, that if you missed me enough, you'd decall. I weaponized silence the same way you had. I let a whole day go by, a day that mattered to you, and I stayed quiet on purpose." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away this time. I'm so sorry for that, I said. That one I regret in particular. We sat in that truth for a while. The old clock ticked. Outside, a car passed with the faint hiss of tires on asphalt. Somewhere down the street, someone's dog barked at nothing at all. I should have told you sooner, she said. About him, about Oliver, about everything. Yes, I said simply, you should have. She winced. You're not going to make this easy, are you? I can't rewrite the past for you, I said. That wouldn't help either of us. You're here now, that's what we have. And is that enough? She asked. I looked at her, really looked. At the lines of exhaustion etched into the face that used to scowl at me over cereal. At the way she curled her body protectively around her son. At the little girl still hiding behind all the bad decisions. It's a place to start, I said. She let out a breath she'd been holding for 7 years. Oliver chose that moment to let out a small, outraged cry that seemed far too dramatic for such a tiny frame. Do you want to hold him? She asked, almost shy. It hit me then. In all the chaos of the night, the crying, the explanations, I hadn't actually held him yet. I'd watched, hovered, resisted the urge to reach out. I hadn't said the words. I thought you'd never ask, I said. She rose carefully, transferring his warm weight into my arms. It's a strange thing, holding a new life when you are so acutely aware of all the years behind you. He felt both impossibly light and heavier than anything I'd carried in a long time. His head fit just under my chin, soft cap brushing against the thin skin of my throat. I could smell baby shampoo and something indefinably newborn, a mix of milk, sleep, and some newness the world hasn't had time to scuff yet. His face scrunched, and then, just as suddenly, relaxed. One tiny hand pressed against my collarbone, his fingers curling and uncurling like he was practicing holding on to something. After a moment of fumbling, he latched onto the fabric of my robe with surprising strength and refused to let go. Hello, Oliver, I whispered. We've been expecting you, we just didn't know it. Hannah watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Awe, maybe, or grief, or both. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Parenting, I asked, or apologizing? Both, she said. Good, I replied. If you thought you had either one figured out, I'd be more worried. She let out a small, surprised laugh that loosened something tight in the room. We'll work on it, I added. One diaper, one conversation at a time. Later that morning, after coffee and toast, and a hurried call where I lied to Mark, and told him I'd call him back later with some news. We bundled Oliver into his car seat and drove to the store. The air outside had that damp chill that seeps into your bones, even when the sun is out. In the car, Oliver's occasional squeaks and soft snuffles punctuated the sound of the turn signal, and the low murmur of the radio I'd forgotten to turn off. At the store, the fluorescent lights were too bright, the aisles too long. The smell of detergent, plastic, and overripe bananas pressed in around us. We must have looked odd. Me in my sensible shoes and cardigan, Hannah in her stretched-out sweatshirt, dark crescents under her eyes, and Oliver in his car seat, hooked over my forearm like a ridiculously precious shopping basket. We stood in front of the wall of diapers, both of us staring up at the rows of colored packages. Do you know which kind you use? I asked. She nodded slowly. Those, she said, pointing. Size 1, he's not quite into 2s yet. We loaded diapers, wipes, tiny socks, formula as a backup, a couple of cheap onesies. And because I saw her eyes linger on it even as she tried to move on, a soft, worn-looking stuffed rabbit from the clearance bin. "For him," I said, dropping it into the cart. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," I said, "I want to." She looked like she wanted to protest further, but instead, she just reached down and brushed the rabbit's ear with her fingertips. On the way to the checkout, we passed the small display of cribs and playpens. Hannah's gaze snagged on them and stayed there. "We'll sort that later," I said. "For now, the laundry basket and some pillows will do. He's not going anywhere under his own steam just yet." Her mouth curved. "Give him time," she said. "He's already figured out how to wiggle out of every swaddle I've ever tried." Back at the house, the afternoon light had gone softer, sliding in at an angle that made the dust motes in the living room look like lazy stars. We set up a makeshift sleeping space for Oliver, a laundry basket padded with folded blankets, set safely on the floor by the sofa. He lay there kicking his legs, the plush rabbit tucked beside him, one tiny foot planted against it, as if he'd already laid claim. "Are you going back to him?" I asked later, when Oliver was dozing and the house had settled into a new kind of quiet. We were at the kitchen table again. There was a faint, sour milk smell in the air, and a burp cloth draped over the back of the chair like a white flag. "No," she said immediately, surprising us both. "I can't. If it was just me, maybe. But with Oliver." She shook her head, curls brushing her cheeks. "I looked at him last night," she continued, "and I heard myself saying all the things you used to say to me about choosing better. And I realized I was about to teach him the opposite. That this drama, this walking on eggshells, is what love looks like." I nodded slowly. "And where were you going when you got in the car?" I asked. "Before you ended up here?" She hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Honestly," she said, "I don't know, I just drove for an hour, 2. The highway signs blurred together. At one point I pulled off into a parking lot and just sat there while he screamed in the back seat. I fed him, changed him, cried harder than he did, and then got back on the road. And then I saw the sign for our exit. And I thought, if I don't turn now, I never will." I swallowed. "Thank you for turning," I said. She looked away, blinking fast. "I'm broke," she said bluntly after a moment. "The apartment S in his name. The car is barely hanging on. I can't pay rent next month on what I make, not with daycare, not with everything. I don't know what to do." There it was, the practical reality, beneath the emotional flood. "You're not staying with him," I said. "Good, that's one decision made." I ticked off options in my mind, numbers, space, time, energy. My savings, my pension, the extra room that has sat empty except for the ghosts of her posters, and the boxes I never quite got around to sorting. "You can stay here," I said finally, "for now." Her head snapped up. "For how long?" she asked cautiously. "For as long as it takes to figure out a plan that doesn't involve you crawling back to a man who would leave his child because he doesn't want to be saddled," I said. "This is not a revolving door. It's a home. Treat it like one." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I don't want to invade your space. You've built a life without me. I can find a room somewhere or a shelter, or—" "No," I said, more firmly than I meant to. "You and that baby are not going to a shelter while I have a spare room and a functioning kettle. I won't pretend everything is fine." It is. But I am not going to let pride put you on a waiting list somewhere when there is a bed down the hall. She looked torn, her shoulders caught between stiffening and slumping. I don't want to be a burden, she said. I'm 38, Mom. I should have my own place. I should have something. You do, I said. You have a son. You have a car that works most of the time. You have a mother you haven't entirely alienated yet. It's a short list, but it's something to build from. Let me help. I'll get a second job, she said quickly, almost desperately. Nights or weekends, I'll pay rent. I'll give you money for groceries and utilities, and you will not get a second job that leaves you too exhausted to care for that baby, I interrupted. We'll look at your budget. We'll see if there's work you can do that actually has a future. For now, your job is to heal, feed that child, and sleep when you can. My job is to keep the lights on and make sure you remember you are not alone. She stared at me, jaw working like she was chewing on words she didn't know how to swallow. You would do that, she said, after everything. I felt something old and brittle inside me soften. You're my daughter, I said. You don't age out of that. She covered her face with her free hand, shoulders shaking. Oliver fussed in his basket next to the table, kicking his legs against the blanket. I reached over and steadied the side with a gentle touch. His foot bumped my knuckles, his toes curled instinctively around my finger for a brief, fierce moment, then released. I can't promise not to make mistakes, I added, more to myself than to her. I've been at this for nearly 40 years, and I still don't know what I'm doing half the time. She let out a small, wet laugh. Me either, she said. Good, I replied. We can be confused together. We made a list later on the back of an old envelope. Not just of diapers and formula and doctor's appointments, but of other things. Call Mark. Look into childcare options. Find out if there were any legal steps to take about Colin, custody, child support, protection, if it ever came to that. I watched Hannah as we wrote, the way her hand gripped the pen too tightly, the way her eyes drifted toward Oliver every few seconds, as if to make sure he was still there. I'll call your brother tomorrow, I said. Tell him you're here. Do you think he'll be mad? She asked. He'll be something, I said. He missed you too in his own way. He's better at pretending he doesn't. You two are alike that way. She smiled faintly. We'll give him time, I added, just like we're giving us time. Outside, the afternoon sun shifted. Light moved slowly across the floor, inching toward the laundry basket, where Oliver lay wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling fan as if it were the most fascinating invention the world had ever produced. I had gone to bed the night before believing my world was settled. Not perfect, but at least predictable. Quiet days, predictable routines, my book club on Thursdays, Mark's calls on Sundays, the ever-present ache of a missing daughter I'd learned to carry like an old injury. Now there was a baby in a makeshift crib, a daughter at my kitchen table, and a road back between us that was long and full of potholes, but a road nonetheless. We would fight again, I knew that. Old patterns don't vanish overnight. There would be sharp words and slammed doors and days when the house felt too small for both our tempers. There would be nights when Oliver wouldn't sleep and mornings when the laundry never seemed to end. There would also be first smiles and first steps, and the strange, quiet joy of watching my daughter become a mother in the same rooms where she once was a child. For the first time in years, I didn't know exactly what my life would look like in 3 months. Strangely, that didn't terrify me. It felt in a small, tentative way like hope, thin and wobbly as a newborn's neck, but real. I looked over at Oliver, who had managed, in the time it had taken for me to drift into these thoughts, to work one arm free of his blanket. His fist waved in the air, slow and determined, as if he were trying to punch his way into the world on his own terms. "Stubborn," I murmured. Hannah followed my gaze and smiled. "Runs in the family," she said. We sat there, 3 generations in a sunlit kitchen that suddenly felt less like a museum and more like a home again, messy, uncertain, loud in new ways. The clock on the wall ticked on, indifferent and steady. For once, I didn't mind not knowing exactly what it was counting down to.